Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to remind you that the taking of photographs and the use of recording equipment are strictly prohibited in council. In accordance with New York City law, please turn off all electronic watches, pagers, and cellular telephones.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Bernard Schwartz, the director of the Unterberg Poetry Center, and it's my privilege to welcome you to tonight's readings by Lorrie Moore and Jonathan Franzen. The writers will be introduced by their editors, Vicki Wilson and Jonathan Galassi. Tonight's event is also being broadcast live on our website, and I'd like to welcome that audience as well. Our virtual poetry center, which allows for the digital dissemination of both live readings and those from our archive, is made possible in part by a generous grant from the Sidney E. Frank Foundation. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank some of our other seasoned supporters: the National Endowment for the Arts, Eva Usedan, Joan and Jack Jacobson, the Kaplan Foundation, Time Warner Cable in partnership with Ovation TV, the New York City Department of Youth and Community Development, and the New York State Council on the Arts. We're especially grateful to John Greenwood, not only for underwriting tonight's event, but for his decades of dedicated service to the Poetry Center. John has been one of our most ardent supporters, and the very existence of a virtual poetry center, where you can now listen to the likes of Harold Pinter, W.H. Auden, Doris Lessing, and Truman Capote, is no small testament to his years of persistent advocacy. Following tonight's readings, both writers have agreed to answer questions from the audience. You should have received an index card in your printed program. If you have a question, please write it down and pass it to one of the ushers. After the brief Q&A, we invite you all to join us for a book signing in the art gallery just next door. Books by both Lorrie Moore and Jonathan Franzen will be available for purchase at that time, courtesy of Barnes & Noble. Meanwhile, the next event in the reading series will take place on Monday, November 22nd, when Salman Rushdie will read from his work. Mr. Rushdie will be introduced and then interviewed by Suketu Mehta. Jonathan Galassi is the president of Farrar, Straus & Giroux, where he has worked since 1986. He's the author of 2 books of poetry and has translated several works by the Italian poet Montale. His translation of Leopardi's Canti has just been published. Vicki Wilson is a vice president and associate publisher at Knopf, where she has served as an editor for more than 30 years. Among the writers she has worked with are Walter Abish, Lauren Bacall, Peter Bogdanovich, William Gass, Sapphire, Scott Spencer, and Lorrie Moore. At present, she's also working on a biography of the actress Barbara Stanwyck. So please welcome Vicki Wilson as she introduces Lorrie Moore.
Hello. Here's what we all know about Lorrie Moore. Almost instantly, when we begin to read her stories or novels and find ourselves in the midst of that particular seemingly winsome, languid voice, in the midst of her world that seems sort of normal and then teeters on a precipice, what we know is that we haven't been there before. Things feel different. They may look the same. It looks like life as we know it, but in truth, in split seconds, it's all being rearranged and rearranged again as we read on. We know that 1 minute we're laughing out loud at Lorrie's fierce eye for the telling detail that so captures the absurdity of things and the fragility. And in the next, we sense that the ground has been moved out from under us. Things turn unsafe. We've taken a wallop in the gut. And just when we're reeling and hovering, we're brought back to safety, all in a flash. Expectations must be disrupted, and they are in Lorrie Moore land. Awkwardness is her realm, the comical and the embarrassing. what happens between people at those awkward moments in times of collision, Lorrie says, of emergency, disorientation. Hers is the world of fatal and fatalistic ambivalence. Lorrie Moore has been heralded as the writer of her generation. Critics have described her work as enchanting, profound, dazzling, fiercely funny, haunting, lyrical and prickly, tragic. She's been called a writer of comic masterpieces. She explores the idiosyncratic and the mundane and charms us with her delicate touch, sharp insights, and dreaminess. In fact, I would say that Lorrie's work has influenced a generation of short story writers, novelists, and screenwriters. Her writing, devastating, oddball, creates a state of feeling that goes to the heart of loneliness and loss, of being untethered, floating away in a vast universe, of what Emily Dickinson calls zero at the bone. Lorrie and I have worked together since the publication of her first book, The Brave and Beguiling Self-Help, Stories that Satirize the Culture of Advice. During the years since, as life and craft have intervened and self-help has been followed by new novels and collections of stories, anagrams like Life, Who Will Run the Frog Hospital, Birds of America, A Gate at the Stairs, Lorrie's writing has taken on a richness and depth, a boldness and freedom. It could be said that Lorrie Moore has changed the chromosomal makeup of the short story, and that she belongs in the company of such masters as Frank O'Connor and Eudora Welty, V.S. Pritchett and John Cheever, Mavis Gallant, William Trevor, and Alice Munro. As a novelist, she's been compared to Joe Heller and John Updike. Awards and grants have come to her, a Pan Malamud, a Lannan Foundation. She's won a Guggenheim and an NEA and a Rockefeller and been inducted into the Academy. All of this is well and true, but in the countless reviews I've read of her work, the descriptions of how she writes and what she's accomplished, what has never been said of her and what is the hidden truth is that, plainly stated, Lorrie Moore is the it girl, that she herself dazzles, that her irresistible quality in her quiet way leaves us in her thrall, that men and women journey to the Midwest as if on a pilgrimage to be in her company, to interview her and to hear her speak. Readers fall under her spell as much as they are captivated by her writing. And that is exactly what's about to happen to us here tonight. Please welcome Lorrie Moore.
Thank you. Well, I have the chicest editor in New York. Only a fool would come out on a stage after an introduction like that, but here I am because I have a job to do, and that's to warm you up for the lovely and brilliant John Franzen. With that task in mind, I wrote a little poem, and here it is. Opening acts, opening acts. I'm not complaining, I'm just a girl facing facts. We shall overcome someday. But it's so sweet to be here, and it's a beautiful thing to be part of an evening that lets freedom ring. That's my little foray into doggerel. And now, we may perhaps to begin. I'm reading from a novel called A Gate at the Stairs, and the narrator is a young woman, Tassie Kelchin, who's looking back at the year she was 20. And what is there in that year but love and death? That's all there is in any year. Love and death. I thought I was missing something there for a second. No, love and death, that's it. I'm going to start with love. I have to take my glasses off a little bit. He had a smile that made you realize that some skulls contained an entire power plant set up in miniature inside, and the heat and electricity they generated spilled their voltage out through the teeth and eyes. "Teach me some Portuguese," I said over coffee and cola at a back table near a table of magazines and flyers. And what he taught me, phrases from little songs I repeated and rehearsed at home. They could have been Etruscan for all I knew. Negro, blanco, mi gusta naranja. I learned much later it was actually Spanish with some Italian thrown in. Except for the words to Happy Birthday, none of it was Portuguese at all. Thus began my protracted misunderstanding of Romance languages. In high school, I had taken German with Frau Zinkraub. On the tops of all my quizzes, I drew pictures of Panzer tanks with Hitler on top and a salute. I had tried Latin, but in situ, there had been no one to speak it with, and so what was the point? I would do things like imagine ergonomic meant their fourishness. Romance languages eluded me both generally and specifically. Nothing was as cryptic and ripe for misunderstanding as the physical language of a boy's love. What was an involuntary grimace, I took to be rapture. What was a simple, natural, masculine compulsion to be in, to tunnel and thrust, I saw as a tender desire to be sweetly engulfed and at least momentarily overpowered by another's devoted attentions. What was an urgent, automatic back and forth of the body, I thought of as the eternal romantic return of the lover. Kissing was not animal appetite, but the heart flying up to the lips and speaking its unique attraction and deep eternal fondnesses in the only way it could. The juddering of climax, as involuntary as a death rattle, I took to be a statement of hopeless attachment. Why, I don't know. I didn't think of myself as sentimental. I thought of myself as spiritually alert. "Are you a virgin?" he had asked. "Yes," I said. That he couldn't tell already, that it wasn't spelled out all over my face and demeanor, thrilled me. To be funny, I rolled my head with a harlot's abandon and purred, "I am." I fell back the way a cooked onion slid apart in all its layers when bit. Later, I would come to believe that erotic ties were all a spell, a temporary psychosis, even a kind of violence, or at least they coexisted with these states. I noted that criminals, as well as the insane, tended to give off a palpable, vibrating allure, a kind of animal magnetism that kept them loved by someone. How else could they survive at all? Someone had to hide them from the authorities. Hence, the necessity and prevalence of sex appeal for people who were wild and on the edge. If only I could have dated someone who was both insane and criminal. If only I could have dated the criminally insane, I would have doubled my fun and entered the purest, highest, exhilarating, erotic, and narcotic trance. And if I'd lived to tell the tale, perhaps come to my senses sooner. I was in a fused condition of ecstasy and retrospective rue almost always, and from the beginning. "I love you," I would say. And he said nothing at all, but no shame rose in me to rescue or silence me. "I love you," I said again, and then I added, "Is there an echo in here?" "There is," he would say, smiling. His teeth were the color of cream, his gums the pale locks pink of a winter tomato. He wore wrapped around his neck a black and white scarf, a print I thought of as Middle Eastern, though it could have been a Navajo tablecloth for all I knew. "Yeah, I thought so," I would say. And then I would tenderly smooth the strands of hair off my own face, myself. I had told Murph that I had a crush on a South American, and while I was out, she called from her boyfriend's one night and sang into the phone machine, Pedro, Pedro, Bobedro, Banana, Fana, Fo, Fedro, Fi, Fi, Mo, Medro. That's the end of the love part. And now we're doing death in the form of an autumnal scene. Life was unendurable, and yet everywhere it was endured. I was reliving my old homework from mythology for freshmen. The work of grief, where only unsteady progress could be made, seemed at first Herculean, then Sisyphean, then Persean, then Echovian. Then one was turned finally and prematurely into a flower or tree, with a flower's curvature and a tree's yearning reach, paralyzed but with shoes and dinner and chores. As the autumn weeks went by, more and more I left my room and began to help my father with the harvest, and sometimes even rode with him, taking the small roads among the drumlins and moraines to Chicago, delivering potatoes and our 3-season spring mix to some restaurants, as well as occasionally setting up at the farmers' markets there. Certain moments the whole earth seemed a grave, other times, more hopefully, a garden. We would start off bright and early into the rising sun, the ground billowing up its dew in such heavy, magical vapors that when one was in the troughs of the highway, one couldn't see a foot ahead, and the fields looked as if they were on smoky fire, preparing for the visitation of ascending or descending gods. Which could it be? Perhaps it was true what people used to say about our county, outer space was interested. But then the air would clear and the day would be awash in light. I studied the third cutting hay, rolled into tight coils on the fields and placed in perfect distances from one another, as if by an art department. One had to get on with life, out of good manners, if nothing else. My dad and I would strike up random conversation. Seahorses give birth, I would begin, but they're male. Why do we even call them male if they give birth? And my dad would be silent, driving, considering. Then he would speak. Because they insist on it, he said. They don't want what happened to ladybugs to happen to them. These ladybugs have masculinity issues to beat the band. I tried to laugh. I appreciated his trying to acknowledge me, be with me, though it had become difficult for him. Ahead of us, ballooning clouds floated there absurdly, as if for a party that had yet to begin. Groups of geese crawled through the sky, their metallic honks declaring their departure south. We would stop somewhere to eat and do just and only that, stop and eat. We got BLTs and soup, and then would continue on our way. The brilliant gold leaves and grasses, the drying roadside timothy and blue stem all looked on a nice day like a hymn to sunlight, when in fact, if one actually thought seriously about the situation, the mechanism of their dialogue with the sun had been shed entirely. The honey locusts had gone first, raining shimmering trails of seedlings into the gutters of the streets in town. Then the yam and ham-hued maples, a papery caramel of leaves, or a trail of maize, or both, lined every road we were on. How like the end of love to leave a beautiful corpse when they weren't gold against blue, like something royal. The oaks bore the flat, blackish red of a blood orange, and my father and I would drive along, staring out at them through the windshield, each of us thinking our own thoughts. One evening, migrating songbirds oriented toward the moon mistook a red-lit cell phone tower for their destination, and we watched as they all shredded themselves in the tower's steel supports. More disastrous love performed in cymbals. As we passed, my father slowed down and sped up again. Silence was not the worst thing, though it still contained sorrow and making do. Here and there, a rabbit scurried across our path. "Are rabbits nocturnal?" I asked. "Yep," said my father. "Well, Why do you see them in the day as well? My father was quiet for a long time. They work in shifts, he finally said. Fattening in the butt, shy, petty, car-sick except in a truck. Perhaps I was more suited to country life than I'd ever understood. When we got back at night, my father would slam the truck door and look at the vast and watchful sky. That's a hell of a heaven up there, he would say. That's the end of the death part. Thank you.
Hello. It's an honor to say a few words about Jonathan Franzen. We've been working together since the late 80s, and I've been privileged to watch him publish 6 books. The 27th City was 1988. And he was 29, I think, at the time. Strong Motion was published in 1992, and the corrections came out in 2001, and now we have Freedom. And he has also published 2 books of nonfiction, How to Be Alone, a collection of essays, and a work of memoir, The Discomfort Zone, in 2006. I think that, for me, the most salient thing about Jonathan's writing is how he seeks to investigate both personal and social reality. If you go back and read his famous Harper's essay, which tells you a lot about not just about contemporary fiction, but about him and his views of it. He talks about beginning his first book as a 22-year-old dreaming of changing the world. And I think that as he has grown and matured, maybe his ambition has changed from changing the world to giving us the world, to understanding the world, to interpreting the world, to accepting the world. And the process of his growth is reflected in his wonderful books. I think that it's fair to say that marriage is Jonathan Franzen's greatest subject. It's there in all his books. And it takes on a deeper coloration as you read through him. Marriage is the place where the personal and the social come together in the most intimate and profound way. It's the place where freedom runs up against, personal freedom runs up against what George Eliot called self-suppression and compromise. And I think that inexorable conflict is at the heart of his work. So I hope that we'll hear about marriage tonight. I have no idea what we're going to hear about. But I think that marriage is the controlling metaphor of his work in many ways. In the Harper's essay, he quotes Don DeLillo as saying that writing is a form of personal freedom. It's the way for a writer of breaking all the bonds and looking at the world totally free. So I'm happy to introduce to you someone who I think has used his freedom very well indeed.
Hi. Thank you all for coming. It's nice to be back here. It's nice to be reading with Lorrie, whose work I have admired for a long, long time, ever since Self-Help, back in whatever that was, 86, 87. And we talked for a long time about trying to read together, and here we are. So it's really nice to be here. And she has set me up in a somewhat uncomfortable way, but I knew that was coming. I was just backstage offering to read first, and she was having none of it. So I'm going to read from the book that is in the stores now, Freedom, which is a hard book to read from because there are no short parts. They're all long parts. I should have saved the place before I. So I'm just going to read from. I'm just going to basically trail off in the middle of a scene, which goes on for another half hour if I were to read it at full length. And this is right in the middle of the book, but it's chronologically very early. It's a chapter called Womanland. It's about Joey Berglund, who is a kid who's just gone off to college, paying his own way after having left his parents' house 2 years earlier to move in with his girlfriend in the house next door. Growing up in St. Paul, Joey Berglund had received numberless assurances that his life was destined to be a lucky one. The way star halfbacks talk about a great open field run, the sense of cutting and weaving at full speed through a defense that moved in slow motion, the entire field of play is all visible and instantaneously graspable as a video game at rookie level, was the way every facet of his life had felt for his first 18 years. The world had given unto him, and he was fine with taking. He arrived as a first-year student in Charlottesville with the ideal clothes and haircut, and found that the school had paired him with the perfect roommate from Nova, as the locals called the Virginia suburbs of D.C. For the first 2.5 weeks, college looked like it would be an extension of the world as he had always known it, only better. He was so convinced of this, took it so much for granted, that on the morning of September 11, he actually left his roommate, Jonathan, to monitor the burning World Trade Center in Pentagon while he hurried off to his Econ 201 lecture. Not until he reached the big auditorium and found it all but empty did he understand that a really serious glitch had occurred. Skipping a paragraph. In the days after 9/11, everything suddenly seemed extremely stupid to Joey. It was stupid that a vigil of concern was held for no conceivable practical reason. It was stupid that people kept watching the same disaster footage over and over. It was stupid that the Chi-Fi boys hung a banner of support from their house. It was stupid that the football game against Penn State was canceled. It was stupid that so many kids left grounds to be with their families. And it was stupid that everybody at Virginia said grounds instead of campus. The 4 liberal kids on Joey's hall had endless stupid arguments with the 20 conservative kids, as if anybody cared what a bunch of 18-year-olds thought about the Middle East. A stupidly big fuss was made about the students who'd lost relatives or family friends in the attacks, as if the other kinds of horrible death that were constantly occurring in the world mattered less. And there was stupid applause when a van full of upperclassmen solemnly departed for New York to give succor to the Ground Zero workers, as if there weren't enough people in New York to do the job. Joey just wanted normal life to return as fast as possible. He felt as if he'd bumped his old Discman against a wall and knocked its laser out of a track he'd been enjoying and into a track he didn't recognize or like, and also couldn't make stop playing. Before long, he was so lonely and isolated and hungry for familiar things that he made the rather serious mistake of giving Connie Monahan permission to take a Greyhound bus to visit him in Charlottesville, thereby undoing a summer's worth of spade work to prepare her for their inevitable breakup. All summer, he labored to impress on Connie the importance of not getting together for at least 9 months so as to test their feelings for each other. The idea was to develop independent selves and to see if these selves were still a good match. But to Joey, this was no more a test than a high school chemistry experiment was research. Connie would end up staying in Minnesota while he pursued a business career and met girls who were more exotic and advanced and connected, or so he'd imagined before 9/11. He was careful to schedule Connie's visit while Jonathan was at home in Nova for a Jewish holiday. She spent the entire weekend camped out on Joey's bed with her overnight bag beside her on the floor, zipping her things back inside it as soon as she was done with them, as if trying to minimize her footprint. While Joey endeavored to read Plato for a Monday morning class, she pored over the faces in his first-year Facebook and laughed at the ones with odd expressions or unfortunate names. By Joey's reliable count, they had sex 8 times in 40 hours, stoning themselves repeatedly on the hydroponic bud she'd brought along. When it came time to take her back to the bus station, he loaded a bunch of new songs onto her MP3 player for the punishing 20-hour return trip to Minnesota. The sorry truth was that he felt responsible for her, knew he needed to break up with her anyway, and couldn't think how. At the bus station, he raised the subject of her education, which she'd promised to pursue, but somehow in her obdurate way, without explanation, hadn't. You need to start taking classes in January, he told her. Start at Inver Hills and then maybe transfer to the U next year. Okay, she said. You're really smart, he said. You can't just keep being a waitress. Okay, she said. She looked away desolately at the line forming by her bus. I'll do it for you. Not for me, for you, like you promised. She shook her head. You just want me to forget about you. Not true at all, Joey said, although it was fairly true. I'll go to school, she said, but it's not going to make me forget about you. Nothing's going to make me forget about you. Right, he said, but we still need to find out who we are. We both need to do some growing. I already know who I am. Maybe you're wrong, though. Maybe you still need to... No, she said. I'm not wrong. I only want to be with you. That's all I want in my life. You're the best person in the world. You can do anything you want, and I can be there for you. You'll own lots of companies, and I can work for you. Or you can run for president, and I'll work for your campaign. I'll do the things nobody else will do. If you need somebody to break the law, I'll do that for you. If you want children, I'll have them for you. Joey was aware of needing his wits about him to reply to this rather alarming declaration, but he was unfortunately still somewhat stoned. Here's what I want you to do, he said. I want you to get a college education. Like, for example, he unwisely added, if you were going to work for me, you'd need to know a lot of different stuff. That's why I said I'd go to school for you, Connie said. Weren't you listening? He was beginning to see, as he hadn't in St. Paul, that things' prices weren't always evident at first glance, that the really big ballooning of the interest charges on his high school pleasures might still lie ahead of him. We better get in line, he said, if you want a good seat. Okay. Also, he said, I think we should go at least a week without calling. We need to get back to being more disciplined. Okay, she said, and walked obediently toward the bus. Joey followed with her overnight bag. He at least didn't have to worry about her making any scenes. She'd never been a compromiser of him, never an insister on sidewalk hand-holding, never a clinger, a pouter, a reproacher. She saved up all her ardor for when they were alone. She was a specialist like that. When the bus doors opened, she stabbed him with one burning look and then handed her bag to the driver and boarded. There was no bullshit about waving through the window or making kissy faces. She put earphones in her ears and slouched down out of sight. There was no bullshit in the weeks that followed either. Connie obediently refrained from calling him, and as the national fever began to break and autumn deepened on the Blue Ridge, Joey attended blowout Cavalier football losses and worked out at the gym and gained numerous pounds of beer weight. He gravitated socially to hallmates from prosperous families who believed in carpet bombing the Islamic world until it learned to behave itself. He wasn't right-wing himself, but was comfortable with those who were. Reaming Afghanistan wasn't exactly what his sense of dislocation demanded, but it was close enough to afford some satisfaction. Only when enough beer had been consumed to bring a group conversation around to sex did he feel isolated. His thing with Connie was too intense and strange, too sincere, too muddled with love, to be fungible as coin of bragging. He disdained but also envied his hallmates for their communal bravado, their porny avowals of what they wanted to do to the choicest babes in the Facebook, or had supposedly done in isolated instances while wasted and seemingly without regret or consequence to various wasted girls at their academies and prep schools. His hallmates' yearnings still largely centered on the blowjob, which Joey apparently was totally alone in considering little more than a glorified jerk-off, an amusement for the parking lot at lunch hour. Masturbation itself was a demeaning dissipation whose utility he was nevertheless learning to value as he sought to wean himself from Connie. His preferred venue for release was the handicapped bathroom in the science library, at whose reserve desk he collected $7.65 an hour for reading textbooks and the Wall Street Journal. Landing a work-study job at the reserve desk had seemed to him yet another confirmation that he was destined to be fortunate in life. He was astonished that the library still possessed printed matter of such rarity and widespread interest that it had to be guarded in separate stacks and not allowed to leave the building. There was no way it wouldn't all be digitized in the next 10 years. Many of the reserve texts were printed in formerly popular foreign languages and illustrated with sumptuous color plates. It could even dignify masturbation a little bit to use a century-old German sexual anatomy atlas as an auxiliary to it. He knew that sooner or later he would need to break his silence with Connie, but at the end of each evening, after employing the paddle-handled handicapped faucets to wash his gametes and prostatic fluids down the drain, he decided to risk waiting one more day until finally, late one evening at the reserve desk, on the very day he'd realized that he'd probably waited one day too long, he got a call from Connie's mother. "Carol," he said amiably. "Hello." "Hello, Joey. You probably know why I'm calling." "No, actually, I don't." "Well, you've just about broken our little friend's heart is why." Stomach lurching, he retreated to the privacy of the stacks. "I was going to call her tonight," he told Carol. "Tonight? Really? You were going to call her tonight?" "Yes." "Why do I not believe you?" "I don't know." "Well, she's gone to bed, so it's good you didn't call. She went to bed without eating. She went to bed at 7. "Good thing I didn't call then." "This isn't funny, Joey. She's very depressed. You've given her a depression and you need to stop messing around. Do you understand? My daughter isn't some dog that you can tie to a parking meter and then forget about." "Maybe you should get her an antidepressant." "She's not your pet that you can leave in the back seat with the windows rolled up," Carol said, warming to her metaphor. "We're part of your life, Joey. I think we deserve a little more than the nothing you've been giving us. This has been a very frightening fall for all concerned, and you have been absent." "You know, I do have classes to attend and so forth." "Too busy for a 5-minute phone call after 3.5 weeks of silence." "I really was going to call tonight." "Never mind, Connie, even," Carol said. "Leave Connie out of it for a minute. You and I lived together like a family for almost 2 years. I never thought I'd hear myself saying this, but I'm starting to get an idea of what you put your mom through. Seriously, I never understood how cold you are until this fall." Joey directed a smile of pure oppression at the ceiling. There had always been something not quite right about his interactions with Carol. She was what the prep school boys on his hall and the frat brothers who were rushing him were wont to call a MILF, an acronym that, in Joey's opinion, sounded faintly cretinous for its omission of the T for two. Although he was generally a very sound sleeper, it's an obscene acronym. Although he was generally a very sound sleeper, there had occasionally been nights during the period of his residency at the Monahans when he'd awakened in Connie's bed with strange, anxious premonitions of himself. As the unwitting and horrified trespasser of his sister's bed, for example, or as the accidental shooter of a nail into Blake's forehead with Blake's nail gun, or, strangest of all, as the towering crane at a major Great Lakes dockyard, his horizontal member swinging heavy containers off the deck of a mothership and gently depositing them on a smaller, flatter barge. These visions tended to follow moments of inappropriate connection with Carol, the glimpse of her bare butt through the nearly closed door of her and Blake's bedroom, the complicit wink she gave Joey pursuant to a dinner table belch from Blake, the lengthy and explicit rationale she presented to him for putting Connie on the pill. Since Connie was constitutionally incapable of being displeased with Joey, it had fallen to her mother to register her discontents. Carol was Connie's garrulous organ, her straight-talking advocate. And Joey had sometimes had the sense on weekend nights when Blake was out with buddies of being the sandwiched party in a virtual threesome, Carol's mouth running and running with all the things that Connie wouldn't say, Connie then silently doing with Joey all the things that Carol couldn't do, and Joey jolting awake in the wee hours with a sense of entrapment in something not quite right. Mom, I'd like fuck. So what am I supposed to do, he said. Well, for starters, I want you to start being a more responsible boyfriend. I'm not her boyfriend. We're on hiatus. What is hiatus? What does that mean? It means we're experimenting with being apart. That's not what Connie tells me. Connie tells me you want her to go to school so she can learn administrative skills and be your assistant in your endeavors. Look, Joey said, Carol, I was stoned when I said that. I mistakenly said the wrong thing while stoned on the incredibly strong pot that Connie buys. You think I don't know she smokes pot? You think Blake and I don't have noses? You're not telling me anything I don't know. All you do is make yourself look like a bad boyfriend when you try to snitch on her. My point is that I said the wrong thing, and I haven't had a chance to correct myself because we agreed not to talk for a while. And whose responsibility is that? You know you're like a god to her, literally like a god, Joey. You tell her to hold her breath, she'll hold her breath until she faints. You tell her to sit in a corner, she'll sit in a corner until she keels over with starvation. Well, and whose fault is that, Joey said. It's yours. No, Carol, it's yours. You're the parent. You're the one whose house she's living in. I just came along. Yeah, and now you're going your own way without taking responsibility after being all but married to her, after being part of our family. Whoa, Carol, I'm a freshman in college. Do you understand that? I mean, the weirdness of even having this conversation. I understand that when I was 1 year older than you are now, I had a baby girl and was making my own way in the world. And how's that working out for you? Not too bad, as a matter of fact. I wasn't going to tell you this because it's still early on, but since you asked, Blake and I are going to have a little baby. Our little family's about to get a little bigger. It took Joey a moment to compute that she was telling him that she was pregnant. Listen, he said, I'm still at work. I mean, congratulations and all. I'm just busy at this particular moment. Busy, right. I promise I'll call her tomorrow. No, I'm sorry, Carol said. That won't do it. You need to come out right away and spend some time with her. That's not an option. Then come for a week at Thanksgiving. We'll have a nice family Thanksgiving, all four of us. It'll give her something to look forward to, and you can see for yourself how depressed she is. Joey had been planning to spend the holiday in Washington with his roommate, Jonathan, whose older sister, a junior at Duke, either photographed misleadingly well or was somebody not to miss meeting in person. The sister's name was Jenna, which in Joey's mind connected her to the Bush twins and all the partying and loose morals that the Bush name connoted. I don't have money for a flight, he said. You can take a bus, just like Connie, or is the bus not good enough for Joey Berglund? I also have other plans. Well, you better change your plans, Carol said. That conversation continues for another page and a half and gets only worse for Joey. Skipping along here a little bit. After the library closed, he went out into the chilly night and sat on a bench outside his dorm. As if to reassure himself that Carol had been wrong about him, he wept a little in the darkness on his bench, wept for Connie and her misery, wept for having abandoned her to Carol, for not being the person who could save her. Then he dried his eyes and called his own mother, whose telephone Carol could probably have heard ringing if she'd stood by a window and listened closely. Joseph Berglund, his mother said. I seem to remember that name from somewhere. Hi, Mom. Immediately a silence. Sorry I haven't called for a while, he said. Oh, well, she said, there's really nothing much happening around here except anthrax scares, a very unrealistic realtor trying to sell our house, and your dad flying back and forth to Washington. You know they make everybody flying into Washington stay in their seat for an hour before they land there? Seems like kind of a weird regulation. I mean, what are they thinking? The terrorists are going to cancel their evil plan because the seatbelt sign is on? Dad says they're barely even airborne when the stewardesses start warning everybody to use the bathroom right away before it's too late, and then they start handing out whole cans of drinks. She sounded like a nattering older lady, not the vital force he still imagined when he allowed himself to think of her. He had to squeeze his eyes shut to avert renewed weeping. Everything he'd done with regard to her in the last 3 years had been calculated to foreclose the intensely personal sort of talks they'd had when he was younger, to get her to shut up, to train her to contain herself, to make her stop pestering him with her overfull heart and her uncensored self. And now that the training was complete and she was obediently trivial with him, he felt bereft of her and wanted to undo it. Am I allowed to ask if all is well with you? She said. Everything is well with me. Life's good in the former slave states? Very good. The weather's been beautiful. Right, that's the advantage of growing up in Minnesota. Everywhere you go now, the weather will be nicer. Yep. Are you making lots of new friends, meeting lots of people? Yep. Well, good. Good. It's nice of you to call, Joey. I mean, I know you don't have to, so it's nice that you did. You have some real fans here back at home. A herd of male first years burst out of the dorm and onto the lawn, their voices amplified by beer. Joey, Joey, they lowed affectionately. He nodded to them in cool acknowledgments. Sounds like you've got some fans there, too, his mother said. Yep. My popular boy. Yep. Another silence fell as the herd headed off to fresh watering holes. Joey felt a pang of disadvantage watching them go. He was already nearly a month ahead of his budgeted fall semester spending. He didn't want to be the poor kid who drank only one beer while everybody else was having 6, but he didn't want to look like a freeloader either. He wanted to be dominant and generous, and this required funds. How's Dad liking his new job? He made an effort to ask his mother. I think he's liking okay. It's sort of driving him insane, suddenly having lots of somebody else's money to spend on fixing all the things he thinks are wrong with the world. He used to be able to complain that nobody was fixing them. Now he actually has to try to fix them himself, which is impossible, of course, since we're all going to hell in a handbasket. He sends me emails at 3 a.m. I don't think he's sleeping much. And what about you? How are you? Oh, well, it's nice of you to ask, but you don't really want to know. Sure I do. No, trust me, you don't. And don't worry, I'm not saying that in a mean way. It's not a reproach. You've got your life and I've got mine. It's all good. No, but, what do you do all day? Actually, FYI, his mother said that can be a somewhat awkward question to ask a person. It's sort of like asking a childless couple why they don't have any children or an unmarried person why they aren't married. You have to be careful with certain kinds of questions that may seem perfectly innocuous to you. I'm sort of in limbo right now, she said. It's hard to make any big changes in my life when I know I'm going to be moving. I did start a little creative writing project for my private amusement. I also have to keep the house looking like a bed and breakfast in case a realtor stops by with a potential mark. I spent a lot of time making sure the magazines are nicely fanned. Joey's feeling of bereavement was giving way to irritation because no matter how much she denied that she was doing it, she couldn't seem to help reproaching him. These moms and their reproaches, there was no end to it. He called her for a little support, and the next thing he knew, he was falling short of providing support to her. So how are you on money, she said, as if sensing his irritation. Do you have enough money? It's a little tight, he admitted. I bet. Once I'm a resident here, tuition will go way down. It's just this first year that's really hard. Do you want me to send you some money? He smiled in the darkness. He liked her in spite of everything. He couldn't help it. I thought Dad said there wasn't going to be any money. Dad doesn't necessarily have to know every little thing. Well, and the school won't consider me a state resident if I'm taking anything from you. The school doesn't have to know everything either. I could send you a check made out to cash if that would help you. Yeah, and then what? Then nothing, I promise. No strings attached. I'm saying you've already made your point with Dad. There's no need to take on horrible debt at high interest just to keep proving a point you already made. Let me think about it. Why don't I just put a check in the mail to you? Then you can decide on your own if you want to cash it or not. You won't have to discuss it with me. He smiled again. Why are you doing this? Well, Joey, believe it or not, I want you to have the life you want to have. I've had some free time for asking myself questions while I've been fanning magazines on the coffee table. Like, if you were to tell me and Dad you never wanted to see us again for the rest of your life, would I still want you to be happy? That is a bizarre hypothetical question that has no bearing on reality. That's nice to hear, but it's not my point. My point is that we all think we know the answer to the question. Parents are programmed to want the best for their kids, regardless of what they get in return. That's what love is supposed to be like, right? But in fact, if you think about it, that's kind of a strange belief, given what we know about the way people really are, selfish and short-sighted and egotistical and needy. Why should being a parent just in and of itself somehow confer superior personhood on everybody who tries it? Obviously, it doesn't. I've told you a little bit about my own parents, for example. Not very much, Joey said. Well, maybe sometime I'll tell you more if you ask me nicely, but my point is I've given some real thought to this question of love regarding you. And I've decided, Mom, do you mind if we talk about something else? I've decided, or no, actually, maybe some other day, next week or something. I've got a lot of stuff to do here before I go to bed. A silence of injury descended in St. Paul. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's just really late, and I'm tired, and I still have stuff to do." "I was simply explaining," his mother said in a much lower voice, "why I'm going to send you a check." "Right, thank you. That's nice of you, I guess." In an even smaller and more injured voice, his mother thanked him for calling and hung up. Joey looked around the lawn for some bushes or an architectural cranny where he might cry unobserved by passing posses. Seeing none, he ran inside his dorm and blindly, as if needing to barf, veered into the first John he came to on a hall not his own and locked himself into a stall and sobbed with hatred of his mother. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, hey.
All right.
Okay. This first one is for both of you. And Lorrie, maybe you could go first. What are the particular challenges of setting your novels in a period so close to present-day America and making that setting, its politics and culture, such a large part of your characters' lives?
What are the challenges?
Yeah.
I think the challenges are fewer than if you set it in the 18th century. I mean, these are things that we're all living through, we're all thinking about, we're all experiencing in a great, diverse number of ways. And so I don't really feel it as a challenge. In a way, I feel it would be a challenge to keep all that stuff out of one's fiction. But the challenge, of course, would be to write about it well and interestingly and from a vantage point that perhaps is a little oblique or new. And, you know, the challenges of writing are the same no matter what you write about. I mean, it's just the writing itself that is the challenge, I guess. But now I suppose there are specific things we would have to address about 9/11 and all of that, but I'm not going to take that on, that question. Are you? You will? Okay.
No, not specifically, but
Okay.
I sort of agree with Lorrie that, like, here it is. It's the beating heart of the world we live in. Like, it's not that challenging to ignore what's right in front of you. But I would say that is few media have a longer lead time than the novel. That is, it's not even, you know, it's not the 24-hour news cycle or whatever, the 12-hour news cycle, or even the 365-day news cycle. It's like, for some of us, you know, the 5 or 8 year news cycle. And so, in fact, the challenge is how to set up the writing of a book so that you're not grappling with this intensely meaningful stuff now for a book that's going to be published 6 years in the future. And that, I think, is a real difficulty, how you, and for me, a lot of it involves trying to cut the noise down by about 99% and letting just like a little trickle through, so that you're not paying so much attention to what, you know, the stuff that's blinking right in your face.
This next one is similar. Jonathan, maybe you could go first. Is it easier to work on a book when the politics is less infuriating?
He chose these.
He chose these. We can blame Bernard for these. Or thank Bernard for these.
There's wine. Drink the wine.
I'm going for the wine.
Lorrie's brought me wine, too.
Yeah.
I need that as a carrot dangling in front of me. The infuriation of the politics making things harder or easier?
I guess just the relationship of the two.
I tried to write a Washington novel, and I failed for, I think, about 8 reasons, but there were 2 primary ones. One was I never really found some way to get at it that didn't feel like it had been used dozens of times before. I think I think if I'd spent 40 years on the Washington beat, I might have, finally found my way to a couple of wrinkles that hadn't been explored. And you want to do something new when you're doing a novel, right? I mean, it's right there in the very word, novel. But really, the other problem, the other problem was fiction does require, right, for me at least, fiction is not about espousing. Fiction is about representing, and I like to be able to turn things around truly 180 degrees. And I was never quite able to do that in these incredibly polarized times. I could not free myself of the residual partisan rage.
Very good.
I have forgotten what the question was.
Should I
It's
rephrase
totally up to you. If you want to move on to the next one.
I'll risk it. Because
Okay.
the question is, I guess, something along the lines of, when you're angry about politics, does that get in the way of writing your novel?
Can I do a short answer? No. And we can move on.
You can stay. This one's for you, but Jonathan can answer as well. It's about significant and unexpected developments in one's writing from one book to the next.
Significant developments. I think if a writer started to become, step outside and start to sort of look at one's own work and gauge it and assess it and compare it, it would be just death to the writing. You can't do that. You just all you can do is hope and pray that it's better than the last one, but you never know. And every writer will tell you that even though you've written one book, it doesn't really mean that now you know how to write books and you're going to get better and better. It really feels like you're starting from scratch every time. And every writer feels that, and it's sort of bewildering that it feels that way, but it does. You don't actually even, unless you're writing a trilogy, each book is its own thing, and it doesn't even have a relationship to the previous book, let alone, a sibling rivalry relationship. So, you just hope that you get better, but it's a very uneven course. And, whoever invented the roller coaster really knew what human life was about. So, you want to say anything?
I agree with much of
Jonathan agrees, for anyone who didn't hear. Okay. This next one's for both of you. But do you want to comment on developments from one book to the next?
From one book to the next?
Significant or unexpected was the phrasing of the...
Significant or unexpected? Let's just say the author's the last to know.
She wanted me to say the author's the last to know. No, I was just going to mention that I'd unexpectedly become a bird watcher. That I had not seen coming. And
do you want to talk about how you became? No. All right. This one, we'll start with Lorrie. It's asking, how come Midwesterners are so funny? And are they funnier than New Yorkers?
He chose these questions. I can't believe it. Well, New York is full of Midwesterners. A lot of the funny Midwesterners get out of the Midwest and move here. I don't know. You were raised in the Midwest. I have to be careful what I say. But I don't know. The real estate's gotten very expensive here. So perhaps some funny ones are staying put in the Midwest. And, we know all those people on television, David Letterman and Johnny Carson and others, Dick Cavett, they're all from the Midwest. The Midwest just creates, there's a lot of people from the Midwest. I mean, there's Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart. I mean, it's.
But they're not all funny.
No, not funny. Haha. No.
I think the questioner was wondering, because your books are both so very funny and full of Midwesterners, if there was some connection. Or not.
I do think weather plays a large role in the Midwest, and people have to find ways of amusing each other. Midwestern audiences are very good audiences too, because they're just so glad that their car wasn't stuck in the snow and they could actually make it to the event. So I don't know. I think, yeah, the place that's not so funny is central Pennsylvania and southern Ohio.
That was sort of a tricky question for Lorrie, because you are a New Yorker, strictly speaking.
Not strictly speaking.
Well, New York Stater. We will not get into this here. There are a lot of humorless Midwesterners. And yes, I think partly there are hardships there, but there are hardships in New York City too. One flashes on the Gary Larson cartoon with the scientist at the blackboard trying to explain humor with "kick me" taped to the seat of his pants. I was just going to say that the people who leave the Midwest, leave it behind, have probably developed some coping skills, such as flight. And so people who can master one coping skill may be able to master others, including humor.
Okay, this is. Do you want?
Thanks, Bernard. Great question.
This is the last one. Then it's someone said that they admired the endings of both your books. How do you find the right ending?
You go. You have an answer.
Well, one never really knows if it's the right ending. There might be a better one that you hadn't thought of.
Was there a better one? Now that you look back on the book retrospectively?
Jonathan, who introduced me, Jonathan Galassi, he's only made like 2 significant editorial suggestions in my 23 years with him. Significant. I mean very significant. Like, change this significantly. That's not his way. He's not about making editorial suggestions. He's about saying, you do what you like, you're the writer. But one of them was that I end The 27th City, my first novel, differently. One of the main characters dies violently at the end of that book. And I was wrong. I was right at the time because I was a very angry kid. And I thought, God damn it, I'm going to show them how serious I am. I'm going to kill that character. And he just, it wasn't even a suggestion. He says, does X have to die? I said, yes! But that was a mistake. But I don't think I'm quite answering the question. This is the last question, so we can go on at a little bit of length, and I will urge Lorrie to go on at equivalent length, if not greater. Best case, you have the ending in mind before you start. I think that's how Paula Fox writes her books. You can feel it. The ending is it's just like they're waiting for the book to be written toward it, which is great. That's the way it should feel. How do you know if you found the right one? This is sort of a craft question. I think it's a lessening of the oppressive anxiety about the wrongness of all the endings you've thought of previously. You have an idea and you realize I'm not feeling as anxious as I was before I had that idea. Yeah. Okay, I'm sort of floundering on this question. I'm going to turn it over to Lorrie, and thank you.
When a question begins, your endings are really good. You always wonder if the reader is just happy that the whole thing's over with. So you're never quite sure. In a short story, an ending shines its light back. It's a very end-oriented form. It shines its light back over the story, gives it its meaning. So in a short story, the ending kind of does this about face. I might have spilled your wine, John. Oh no, it's your water. It kind of turns and faces the rest of the story. In a novel, I think, now I'm really going to just invent something here, but it seems correct to me right now as I stare out at these lights. A novel sort of collects all the things that have come in the course of the novel and looks forward, whereas the ending of a short story looks back over the short story. The ending of a novel looks out past the novel into the pages that you will never write, but it gives you a sense of now what's going to happen to the characters. I mean, you have a sense that that the story has completed its energies, but told you and pointed you what direction these characters are going to go in. Does that make sense to you? And now John and I have agreed to kill Bernard for choosing these very difficult questions. So stay around for that. That's going to be fun.
Thank you both. Thank you.